Welcome to the How to Succeed podcast, the show that helps you get to the top and stay there. This is how to succeed at aligning with the buyer's journey. The following podcast is copyrighted by Sandler Systems, LLC, and protected by U.S. copyright laws. Sandler is the worldwide leader in sales, management, and customer service training. You can find this podcast anywhere you listen to podcasts. Click subscribe, like, or give us a review there, and check out any of the additional resources at Sandler.com. I'm your host, Mike Montague, and my guest this week is a longtime Sandler trainer from Reading, England. It's David Davies. Welcome to the podcast. Tell me a little bit about aligning with the buyer's journey, and what are we talking about today?
Yeah, good question. Hey, Mike, thanks for inviting me along and having me on the podcast today. Aligning with the buyer's journey. Wow, so many different organizations that I work with when I first start working with them have spent zero time paying any attention to how their buyer moves through that original awareness phase, understanding that they have a problem that might need something done about it. I start to go out and look at potential solution providers. And starting to have that sort of choreographed beauty parade of vendors come in and do the presentation so you can start to shortlist and select them and how they actually go about making a decision. And if you don't understand how your buyer's going to buy, then how are you going to start to sell to them? How are you going to know that the moves that you've carefully choreographed are in tune with the dance that they're dancing?
Yeah, I think this is such a huge topic, and we've recently written a book. We're going to talk about aligning sales and marketing more this year too. But the new book, How to Sell to the Modern Buyer, and some new Sandler rules that we've revisited for modern times, I think is a really interesting idea, because some of them go back to what Sandler really discovered 50 years ago, which is that it's a lot easier to meet someone where they are and then move along with them than try to do this repeated features and benefits marketing pitch that's standard to everyone and hope somebody along the line resonates with it. Do you feel like that's the key, or is there another maybe common misconception or attitude that we need to have in order to do this right?
I don't know who to blame. There's always kind of a number of different forces that blame here. But I do think we spend so much time carefully working out our messaging and how we're going to attract people into our world and what we're going to do with them when we stick them in the sausage machine and get a client out the other side, that we forget that we've got our scripts, we've got our story, we've got our playbooks, we've got all those things in place. And we forget the buyer's got one too. Pretty sophisticated when they go out to buy. Certainly the stuff I'm involved in, which is technology companies. There are a lot of people that are solving the same problem in very distinctly elegant ways. Plenty of choice for them to go after. And so thinking about how our buyer buys, thinking about is a primary, what job do they need to get done? Spending some time thinking about who you're selling to and what job they need to get done. Frankly, what keeps them hired, what gets them promoted, and what's going to get them fired. Getting that depth of understanding of your buyer and the type of movements that they're going to make to decide, and it's a big decision, that you're going to come in and help them get promoted, which most people forget about, right? The individual themselves are bringing you in to make themselves look good. Okay, and solve a problem for their organization, but fundamentally make them look good first. And so what are the moves that they go through? How do they assess and decide and commit to working with us first? Because then you can start to work out, in my sales process, where do I need to be and what do I need to bring with me? And so one of my first things I ever heard Dave Manson say is show up, bring value. Mm-hmm. And absolutely all the way through the sales process, there's a simple, all the other stuff we teach is amazing, right? But show up, bring value at the right time, at the right place, at the appropriate time in the process. So spending some time, I think, before you start choreographing your dance moves, and take time to have a look at theirs. How is your buyer going to go through a process of making a decision to buy from somebody? Hopefully you, but anybody, somebody.
Yeah, I think that's really interesting for a few reasons. Number one, I think people do kind of get ahead of themselves. They want to scale. They want to figure out what they're about. And I think you should define what you're about and what your unique value proposition is first. But then you got to do that extra step of how does that align with your buyers and who you made it for, and who's the ideal client for you, right? Because it's pretty hard to sell a steak to a vegetarian, but and it doesn't matter how fancy your dance moves are, like that's not going to get it done. So I think there's a lot of pre-work to do that I think people miss to get their head in the right space to be able to connect with another human who's not where you are and not in the same needs, right? When you, I think I'm getting a little philosophical here this morning, Dave, but I feel like when you do the thing, it's not as valuable to you. And it's really hard to understand how somebody else is living without the thing because you have it, right?
Yeah. And you lose sight of the intent, the intention, the reason why anybody would want to do something. It's all about a dollar chase rather than putting. You talked about value propositions. I think definitely have an organizational view of what your value proposition is, and then customize it to your buyer. Because what you believe is true of what you do, you're too close to it, you're too caught up in it, you've been drinking too much Kool-Aid, and you can't actually eloquently get across your value proposition until you put the customer in place, and still you start to work out, great, but how am I going to explain that to you? How are you going to buy my value proposition? What it does, what it is, what it does, how it benefits you, and how you are going to measure that benefit. And it's the you that's quite often missed in that workshop, where sales and marketing come together and disagree about what the client is and what the client wants, certainly in the first instance anyway.
Now, I think as we move on to behavior here, we've spent a lot of time over the last year or so realigning the Sandler selling system with the buyer's journey and thinking about where they are in awareness, consideration, decision, and then, advocacy throughout this process. But I feel like the actual steps can be tricky when we move from the methodology and these general theoretical steps to the practical ones of, some of our clients at Sandler have one call closes. Some of them have enterprise sales that take over a year, and those buyer journeys are significantly different. I'd love to hear your take on maybe how methodology, systems, and then the buying process are all different things, or how do we start thinking about how do we do the right thing at the right time? Because I think people confuse those different things with what we're trying to accomplish and what is actually happening throughout the process.
Yeah, I mean, like you said, we, organizationally, globally deal with a myriad of selling processes from the we've got 3 minutes and you'll buy to sometimes, as you said, 12 months, but I think quite often it's like three years plus in some of the cycles when I first start working with them. And it is that depth of understanding. I think what we bring and what we're trying to bring is the singular ability to have a great conversation with another human being, and maybe at some point with a range of human beings, whether that's a short or a long conversation or a series of conversations over time. I think that stuff works. We talk about behavior, though. You have a singular favorite behavior, and I'm sure it's steeped in all of the things we teach, but I don't think we teach it enough, which is learning the art of shutting up. And then, of course, listening, content and with the intent to understand another human being. In that sense of worrying less about ourselves. And so a lot of what I teach is about, slowing down and maybe even sometimes stopping. So what you're doing, stop while you're doing it, start placing the customer, in the center of your world, and start considering, the world. David Sandler taught us, didn't he? Walk a mile in a man's moccasins and you'll understand him well. Moccasins probably doesn't translate so well over here, but it'll work for the majority of your audience. But spend more time doing that. And that's a singular behavior. Get in a room and start to really kind of openly workshop who you're trying to do business with. And before you work out how you're trying to do business with them, understand them better. And it's the number one behavior I teach. If you want to go faster, slow down.
Yeah, I think that's huge. Now I'm wondering from that, another common mistake that I see is that salespeople can't find that balance of equal business stature in that. So if we're only following our process, we're not being considerate of the buyer. If we're only following the buyer's process, we're not standing up for sort of our rights, what we need. And what I mean by rights is basically not being used throughout the process and being pit against our competition or taken advantage of and things either. Can you talk a little bit about how we align the two processes maybe?
Yes, I think, a couple of things. Understanding your client better, completely, and understanding how they make decisions to, work with vendors, any supplier, trusted advisors, whatever phraseology you want, is a rising agent. For any of us bakers here, you need a raising agent for it to turn from this sort of sloppy mess into a cake, right? And understanding of our customers better is a rising agent of sales. It brings you up to equilibrium. It puts you on a balance, because you feel that you understand them better and you recognize that they put the same legs in the trousers the same way round that you do. They breathe in and out. They walk, they need food, water, shelter, all that stuff, right? They're another human being. And your ability to raise people or raise yourself up to being a human being on a level with other human beings is equilibrium, right? The other challenge, of course, salespeople have forgotten is what we're looking for as people with problems, right? And so typically in your initial engagements with every prospect, most every prospect, who should be selling? Because it's not you, it's them. Your job is to coach them to sell you on the problems they're experiencing, the reason or cause of those problems, the impact it's having, their willingness to invest out of trouble, whether that's money, time, or resources, and of course, to get you sold on the idea that they can make a decision in your lifetime, career lifetime or actual lifetime, doesn't really matter, but pick one. So who's doing the selling? There's a common misconception about sales that it's our job to go and convince people to do stuff. Right. It's not. Our job is to help people understand where they are, where they want to be, and if we can, ethically position ourselves as a gap between where they are and where they want to be. That's when sales is fun. Of course, the other 90% think it's a job where you have to cheat people out of money, and that's no fun. That's not
no, and I think you bring up a great point here about qualification too, because that really aligns both parties. When there is a deal, when there's something interesting for both sides, that's when people can work together. You can co-collaborate and create a solution and find your way through this process together. If there's not something in it for one side or the other, it's not going to work no matter what you put your steps as or what you pitch and say or whatever techniques you use. So I'm wondering what you would think here. What came to mind while you're talking is there's kind of two places where we need to do that. Number one is at the beginning. If we're working with somebody that has a need and we're qualifying hard at the beginning, the middle process always gets a little messy. There's people involved. We got to figure it out. It might take multiple conversations, or the conversation might take multiple directions in there. And then I would say again at the end, we need to really understand and be aligned with them before we close the sale, right? So there may be, aligning and meeting them where they are at the beginning, and then aligning on their decision-making process. And at the end really are the two kind of key spots for me in the behavior. In the middle, sometimes it's smooth, sometimes it's not. Sometimes somebody gets fired in the middle of the process. It gets a little ugly, but we kind of want to make sure before we invest all that time figuring it out, we got the right person. And before we give a presentation, proposal, quote, before we try to close the sale, we need to make sure we understand all of that mess that preceded it. Is that fair?
It is. There's a rule that I don't think people hear very often, which is never go into a box. UK rules, kind of hatch box. You're not allowed to go into anything that's a yellow hatch box on the road unless you can get out the other side. And I think that's what David was trying to teach them. He said, never go into a box. And we do that in sales all the time, don't we? Go into these boxes not knowing what the exit looks like from their perspective. There's a couple of rules. I actually was working with the group this morning on fingerprinting. Fingerprinting is working with your prospect, certainly the champion on your prospect side, on the proposals, presentation, whatever you're doing on their behalf, so that you've got some insider support and help, and somebody who actually in reality is on your selling team. The fact that they work for your prospect customer doesn't matter. They're on your selling team helping you to sell to them because they want to. They're a champion. So we came up with this rule this morning, which is no collusion, there's no conclusion. If you haven't got somebody on that side who's working with you and helping you to understand how to sell to them, the chances of you getting to a positive conclusion are nil. Here's what I find that happening, answering your direct question, Mike, about what's going on in the middle is, I kind of blame sales training for this sometimes, forgive me for saying it, some sales training anyway, which teaches you there's 3 events. There's a beginning, a middle, and an end, right? You open the relationship up, you ask them some questions, you sell them some stuff, job done. And in some settings that works, right? I don't want to get in the way of that. If that's your sales process and it works, let's not change that, stay where we are. We've still got good stuff to help in that space. In the middle, what are we supposed to be doing? Trouble with qualifications, it's described as an event. It's planned as an event. The sales CRM system says it's an event. We have a qualified prospect, ding, and the light bulb goes off, and that's it. The salesperson does presentation, bit of a tap dance, dog and pony show, job done. Of course, the 12 months in between, they're making a call that sounds a bit like, any progress with that proposal I sent across? And they get a no, yes, or I'll leave it with me, I'll check with my boss. Actually, in the middle, you're supposed to be doing research, developing your understanding, developing your cast of characters, developing your relationships with cast of characters, developing your understanding of why they would or wouldn't buy from you, what they are or aren't suffering from. I'm sure this is Jody Williamson, probably from somewhere else anyway. Definition of ethical selling is selling somebody something they don't need. The definition of unethical selling is not selling somebody something they do need. I think I've got that in the right way round.
Yeah.
Long sales cycles are, in my general experience, created by salespeople who stopped qualifying because they did it as an event, not develop it as an attitude. Constantly qualifying our recon, reminding them constantly. Do you remember when we last spoke? This is what we spoke about. What's happened since we last spoke? What's changed since we last spoke? Is it still an opportunity? And what if it is, what do we do next? Those 5 letters have made me more money and my clients more money in the last 7 years than anything I've learned. Beautifully simple. Every conversation, every interaction is a recon. Remember, evaluate what's changed. Is it still an opportunity? It is. Okay, so if it is, what do we do now? What happens next? People forget to do that. They get into check-in mode, just reaching out like they're a 5th member of the four tops, reaching out just to check in and to stick just in front of it so that it seems like no big deal.
Yeah, I think we've already moved into technique here. I love that recon of checking in, and I'm wondering what else we can do to make sure that we're aligned and we stay aligned, because that was a powerful message for me. I do kind of like those checkpoints, but you can get lost there sometimes in the middle if you're not checking in. And I love that always be qualifying is much better than the ABC thing that they taught bad salespeople in a movie once.
Right, they did. It's great fun, and yeah, no, always be always be questioning. I think qualifying, there's always a question to be asked. If there's any gap in your understanding of anything, then prepare well the questions you're going to ask, prepare for the responses you're going to get, and prepare for what you're going to do about it. You're together or apart, because they might have said at some point, eventually, it's a no. I don't know where this stat came from, and I'm willing to accept that 87.8% of statistics are made up. But I did hear that based on some CRM knowledge, takes, talking about significant deals, sort of big consulting or software gigs, about 87.8 days to close them, just under 3 months to get a yes on a deal like that. And so if you have got a 12, 18-month sales cycle, you've probably lost, a good 4 or 5 times in the process. But anyway, put that to one side. Interestingly, he said it took just over something like 187 days to hear no. So it takes twice as long to hear no than it does yes, because people somehow or others don't lose that sense. They put, to your point, relationship development as a technique, not as a constant. Bonding and rapport is something that happened, not something that happens. And then qualification again is, I asked them some questions, I understood them a little bit then. 3 months later, so many things might have changed in their organization. You think about some of the global changes we've gone through in the last 2 years, and still I see salespeople that are not focused in on what's happened since the last time we spoke and what will happen between today and the next time we speak. and just start to follow that journey, right? Staying aligned with your buyer's journey doesn't mean that you throw out your sales process, but it does mean that you stay, or they say a winner has alternatives, right?
Yeah, I think what I heard there is the best way to align with the buyer's journey is to ask them what it is first. Let them tell you. And then you can decide how you align with it, whether that fits what you're doing, how you can make what you're doing fit what they're doing, and work it out from there. But a lot of salespeople just don't ask those questions, or they don't take the time to hear the answers and take action on them.
They ask the question with the intent of asking the question, not the intent of hearing the answer. They hear the answer, but not with the intent to understand the answer. Because, no doesn't always mean no. Certainly in a sales setting, it might mean no for now. It might mean no, not this week. It might mean no, not today. It's that failure to just go back and ask maybe one or two questions, and we call it reversing, right? But based on what you said, what did you mean? That fear, you can only do that when you believe you've got equal business stature, by the way. If you don't believe you've got equal business stature, then of course, you're not understanding the buyer's journey. You've got your foot trapped underneath it and they're being dragged along through a buyer's journey.
I feel like I'm giving you the curveballs here today, but you're handling them nicely so far. So I'm going to give you one more tough one. This one is right down the middle for you. You wrote a book, Making Channel Sales Work, for Sandler. And that seems to me like one of the toughest things to align, because you're not aligning to your buyer's journey, you're aligning to their buyer's journey if you're selling through channel. So does anything jump out from the book that you wrote for us that would help us here with the buyer's journey, or when you're in a really complicated buyer's journey?
So when you're in a really complicated buyer's journey, it plays out in a lot of the work I do working with organizations that sell through third parties. It is complicated sales process. And so, of course, if you're going to manage third parties, first lesson, right? Complaining about the fact that you're nowhere near the client, their problem, your problem, not theirs. You need to work on that. You need to develop the trust for them to be willing, confident, comfortable bringing you in front of their clients, knowing that you're part of their team, not some competitor, or often working on behalf of competitors. We've seen that a little bit. But your job when you're selling through third parties is the job that people like you and I have chosen to do for a living, which is work with sales leaders, sales managers, and sales people, and marketing people, and anybody else that touches customers, to get better at having the conversations they need to have with people. And that's what channel management is. Sales training. It is developing the attitudes, behaviors, and techniques of the people that you've chosen, you've hand selected to go out and sell your products for you. You recruited them, just like a sales director or sales manager would. It's your job to train them, just like a sales director or sales manager would their direct sales team. It's your job to consistently coach them effectively through the challenges that they're experiencing in front of the customer and the opportunities they find, and those kind of things. And I think that's a good first lesson is when you're selling through third parties, what got you good at and what got you where you got to isn't going to get you where you're going. Being the world's greatest salesperson is useful, but being able to train others in how to sell what you do as if they were one of your own team is a single superpower for the great channel managers.
Now, you bring up an interesting point, which is maybe a ninja level question. I told you I'm bringing the heat for you today. But would you say the same thing is true with your buyers and aligning with your buyers' process? If you find out that they're doing something dumb, do you feel like it's your job as a salesperson to coach them on a better buyer's journey than what they're doing? Or is your job to align to theirs? How do you handle that when there's a misalignment? I
had the deep pleasure of being stared at like a madman through most of my career, because we talk about this all the time, right? They're off selling to XYZ PLC, world's largest organization, where people put their feet in trousers and shoes the same way that I do. And so we spend a lot of time talking about what truly equal business stature looks like. Two friends in the pub on a Friday night are able to be honest with each other, right? And they will do. Blood's guts honesty. Truly a trusted advisor would operate in the same manner, wouldn't they? And they won't be careful about their approach to helping somebody understand And maybe question for them, nobody ever does, right? You get to this decision step in Sandler. It's a wonderful place to be, right? Because you've got a qualified prospect that's got some ability to invest. And now you've got to try and find out how they're going to do it. In this particular step, your single only most important question is, why are decisions made the way they're made? Let me tell you why that's important, because they've just told you how decisions are made in their business, and the decisions have been made in their business that way for the last 100 and however many years. And the reason they're made that way is because somebody hands it off to the next person. The apprentice under somebody's wing gets told, here's how we make decisions. We get 7 suppliers, we shortlist the 5, then 3, then we pick 1. Oh, you could just flick a coin, or just throw a pin in the yellow pages or whatever, right? It's the same decision-making process we find. Nobody, and I mean nobody, ever says, why are decisions made this way? Which means nobody ever thinks, why are decisions made this way? Which means nothing ever changes. Dysfunction is inherited. Especially in organizations, and nobody, and I mean nobody, ever has the guts, perhaps the human it required to challenge it. So forgive me asking, but why are decisions made that way?
I love that. It's a great question, and I think a great place to land on here. Once again, we're talking with Dave Davies, a longtime Sandler trainer from the UK and author of Making Channel Sales Work. You've been on the podcast before, so I was maybe just going to give you 2 quick questions here. First one is, what's the next evolution for you? What are you working on? What's the next goal for you?
That's a good question. I spend most of my time taking multi-million pound ideas and helping people build multi-million pound businesses up around them. I think probably in the next evolution for me, I've had a couple of opportunities this year to try what I do in technology with non-technology businesses. And I would really, really, really love to help Denny's effectively bring their franchise to the UK. I'm not sure my heart will thank me for it. But that's the kind of opportunity. I'd like to work in an environment that's unusual to me and see whether what I've learned elsewhere applies well. So something like Denny's, American diners in the UK, we need more of them.
Wow. That sounds really interesting. I'm glad I asked. Do you have a favorite quote, motto, or Sandler rule for aligning with the buyer's journey?
My favorite non-Sandler rule is doing nothing achieves just that. I think it's about the only thing I could ever consider as an original creation of me. My favorite Sandler rule is the hardest one to read, and it's the hardest one to remember, which is you cannot blame a prospect for doing something you didn't tell them it wasn't okay to do. That is my absolute favorite, because it jaw drops when you deliver it in a training session. People go, what the hell do you mean by that, Dave? And I go, well, if you haven't set out some rules of the game, they're going to play their own. There's no point turning up with the Cluedo set if it's Monopoly night, right? You've got to work between each other and work out how this conversation is going to go, how you know it's gone the way you wanted it to, and what the conclusion looks like. So that's my favorite Sandler rule. I wish I knew the number. I shouldn't I?
It's always a good one for the parents as well. When you have children, it's really hard to not get mad at them for doing something you didn't tell them was off limits, because I feel like, as all humans, we feel like stretching and bending and working around the rules is part of our human nature on how we get things done.
100%.
But let's wrap it up for everybody. Based on how to succeed at aligning with the buyer's journey, what is one attitude you'd like people to have? Your customer first. Doesn't mean they're right, but put your customer first. Put them in the center of the conversations that you're trying to have internally, so that when you go out externally, you know who you're talking to, you know what you're talking to them about, and you know how to move with them. That way you'll sell a lot quicker, you'll sell a lot more, and you'll get challenged a lot less on price if you move the way they move. And one key action item or behavior you would like people to do? It doesn't change. If you know your customer so well that you understand the problems they're experiencing so well, then go and find the other 99 people just like them and do me a favor and let them know you exist. It is malpractice to sit around waiting for somebody to find you. It's in significant problems. And if you don't solve significant problems, you have a significant problem. And that'll be growth of your business and your sales. That is great. And finally, the best technique, tool, or hack to use? Pain funnel kills it every time. I've yet to find anybody anywhere who cannot follow that series of beautifully crafted, simple questions. And you don't have to have any product training, sales training, as they normally call it. You don't have any product training to qualify somebody and understand what's going on in their world.
Okay, you might not be able to prescribe the solution, but you'll know what's going on. And they work in every setting. I've yet to find one they don't work in.
I love it. David Davies, a longtime Sandler trainer from Reading, England, and author of Making Channel Sales Work. You can find more about Sandler and that book at sandler.com. Click on find a training location if you don't have a trainer, or reach out to our enterprise team if you have multiple locations. As always, you can subscribe, leave us a review for this podcast on iTunes or Google Podcasts. Send it to somebody that you think needs to hear it, or connect with me, Mike Montague, on LinkedIn. Thank you for listening. And remember, whatever you are, be a good one. The How to Succeed podcast is brought to you by Sandler, the worldwide leader in sales management and customer service training with over 200 locations worldwide. For more information, visit sandler.com.